At a Los Angeles dinner gala, Walt Disney once said something that almost nobody quotes when they tell his story. Standing in front of a room full of guests, he said, "We started the business here in 1923, and if it hadn't been for my big brother, I swear I'd have been in jail several times for checks bouncing. I never knew what was in the bank. He kept me on the straight and narrow." Read that again. The man behind Mickey Mouse, Snow White, and an empire now worth over $200 billion is on record admitting he had no idea how much money was in his own company's bank account, and that without his brother, he'd have ended up in legal trouble more than once. That brother's name was Roy Disney. You've almost certainly never heard his name mentioned the way you've heard Walt's, and without him, there is no Disney empire to talk about at all. To understand why this story matters, you have to understand just how different these two brothers actually were. Walt Disney was the dreamer, the animator, the storyteller, the perfectionist obsessed with every frame of every film. Roy Oliver Disney, 4 years older, was almost his exact opposite. Roy served in the United States Navy during World War I, and when he returned home, he didn't chase art or animation at all. He went into banking, working in Los Angeles, in a job that had nothing to do with cartoons, creativity, or entertainment whatsoever. He understood loans, ledgers, credit, and cash flow, the unglamorous machinery that makes any business actually function. These two brothers didn't complement each other by accident. Walt had the vision. Roy had, by every account, the only working understanding either of them had of where the money was actually going. By 1923, Walt Disney was, by any reasonable definition, a failure. His first company, Laugh-O-Gram Films in Kansas City, had collapsed into bankruptcy. His distributor had gone under, he couldn't pay his own staff, and the studio's assets were eventually seized and sold off through bankruptcy proceedings. Walt was broke, humiliated, and out of options in Kansas City. So he did what a lot of people in his position do. He left. He packed up and moved to Hollywood with almost nothing, hoping to start over. Roy, at the time, had a stable job in banking, the kind of steady, respectable career that most people wouldn't walk away from to bankroll their younger brother's second attempt at a business that had just failed once already. But that's exactly what Roy did. In October of 1923, the two brothers founded the Disney Brothers Studio together, funded in part by a $500 loan from their uncle, and from day one, the roles were clear. Walt would create. Roy would figure out how to keep the lights on. The first real test of that partnership came just a few years later, and it came in the form of a rabbit. By the mid-1920s, Walt had created a character called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, distributed through a man named Charles Mintz. Oswald was genuinely successful, popular enough that Walt believed he'd finally found his breakthrough. Then, during a routine contract renewal negotiation, Mintz revealed something devastating. Due to the fine print of their original agreement, Universal Pictures, not Walt, legally owned the Oswald character outright. Worse, Mintz had secretly gone behind Walt's back and hired away almost his entire animation staff to keep making Oswald cartoons without him. Walt returned from that meeting having lost his most successful character and most of his team in a single conversation. This is the moment most Disney retellings skip past quickly on the way to Mickey Mouse. But somebody had to keep the studio's finances functioning while Walt was reeling from that betrayal and scrambling to create something new from almost nothing. That somebody, again, was Roy, managing what remained of the business, the surviving staff, and the studio's finances while Walt worked to salvage a career that had just been gutted overnight. Out of that disaster came Mickey Mouse, but even Mickey's breakthrough moment almost didn't happen because of money. Walt had a bold, expensive idea. Instead of a silent cartoon, Mickey's third short, Steamboat Willie, would be one of the first cartoons ever synchronized with sound, timed precisely to music and effects. It was ambitious, unproven, and it needed cash the studio simply didn't have. According to accounts from Walt's own associates, at one critical point he wired Roy directly. "Need another $1,200, immediately." There was no venture capital firm to call, no investor pitch deck. Roy's solution was to find money wherever he physically could. He reportedly sold Walt's own car. He sold furniture. The production team cut the orchestra from 30 musicians down to 16 just to make the budget work, and let go of sound technicians they could no longer afford. Walt, obsessive about the timing, ended up personally conducting the recording session himself, counting every beat to make sure the music matched the animation exactly. When Steamboat Willie finally premiered at the Colony Theater in New York on November 18, 1928, the audience reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Mickey Mouse, whistling, perfectly synced to music nobody had heard done that way before, became a sensation. But that premiere almost didn't happen. Not because the idea wasn't good enough, but because there almost wasn't enough money to finish it, and it was Roy who found a way to scrape together every dollar at the last possible moment. This wasn't a one-time rescue. It became the pattern of their entire working relationship. By 1929, Roy had become executive vice president of Walt Disney Productions, formally overseeing the business side, while Walt pushed the creative side further and further, taking bigger financial risks with every new project. When Walt insisted on making Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, a feature-length animated film nobody in Hollywood believed audiences would sit through, a project the industry openly mocked as Disney's folly, it was Roy who had to secure the financing to keep it alive as its budget ballooned from an initial $250,000 estimate to a staggering $1.5 million, an amount that could have bankrupted the studio if the film had failed. Roy negotiated directly with Bank of America to keep the loans coming, even as costs spiraled far past what anyone had originally approved. When Snow White became a massive success in 1937, the headlines went to Walt's genius and vision. Almost nobody wrote about the banker brother who had spent months convincing a bank not to pull the plug on an unfinished cartoon that was hemorrhaging money with no guarantee of ever making a cent back. As the studio grew into an actual entertainment empire, the division of labor only became more pronounced. In September of 1945, Roy officially became president of Walt Disney Productions, specifically to relieve Walt of administrative responsibilities that Walt had never wanted and, by his own admission, wasn't equipped to handle. When Walt decided to build Disneyland, another expensive, unproven idea that many in the industry considered financially reckless, it was once again Roy who had to structure the complicated financing deals that made the park possible, including striking an unprecedented television partnership with ABC specifically to help fund construction. Walt built the vision people could see. Roy built the financial architecture, holding it up, one deal at a time, almost entirely out of public view. Throughout his life, Roy was famously camera-shy and reportedly avoided the spotlight whenever he could, which is a large part of why so few photographs of him even exist compared to the endless footage and photography of Walt. Walt Disney died in December of 1966, in the middle of planning an ambitious new project in Florida, what would eventually become Walt Disney World. He never lived to see it built. And once again, it was Roy who stepped in, this time under the heaviest circumstances yet. Roy deferred his own retirement at what biographers describe as significant personal cost, specifically to see the Florida project through to completion in his brother's honor. He officially became chairman of the board in 1968, continuing to oversee the massive project until it finally opened in October of 1971. Roy died just 2 months after Walt Disney World's grand opening, having spent almost 5 decades of his life managing the financial reality behind his younger brother's imagination. and staying just long enough to make sure the final, largest project of Walt's career actually got finished. Walt Disney has his name on the company, his signature in the logo, and statues of himself throughout the parks he dreamed up. And that's not wrong. His creative vision genuinely built something the world had never seen before. But by his own account, standing at that dinner gala admitting the truth out loud, Walt knew exactly how close his career came to collapsing entirely, more than once without his brother quietly working the phones, the banks, and the balance sheets behind the scenes. Roy Disney never wanted the spotlight, and history mostly obliged him by leaving him out of it. But every time Walt bet everything on an idea nobody believed in, a rabbit, a mouse, a feature-length cartoon, an amusement park, an entire city in Florida, it was Roy who found a way to make sure there was still a company left standing the next morning. The empire has Walt's name on it. It exists because of both of them. If you liked learning the real story hiding behind a name everyone already knows, subscribe. History is full of people standing just outside the spotlight who deserve to be at the center of it.